guests know them. Suzanne Miller and Tasneem Elsayed. They were participants in the Transitional Justice Institute workshop in Northern Ireland last summer. I don't know if you want to describe more about it so that I won't go into the whole introduction there, but and one of the requirements for their participation, actually forgetting the grade, was that they have to give a presentation about their experiences and what they learned and so on. And I have been really looking forward to this, and I think that you'll all enjoy it very much. So I'll just turn it over to you two.
So, as Professor Rusciano said, we attended the Transitional Justice Institute in Northern Ireland, the Ulster University at Jordanstown campus. The topic this year was Women in Political Settlements, International, Regional, and Local Approaches to Peacemaking. So that's Ulster University. It's a picture of the professors and participants. Suzanne right here.
These people are from all over the world, and they all have incredible stories. So we can pass around their biographies later. We brought that with us for the package that they gave us, and you can all take a look if you want to see who all these people are, because they're all amazing.
So what is the Transitional Justice Institute? It's a world-leading, law-led, multidisciplinary research center focused on transitional justice. Transitional justice is how societies deal with the transition from conflict and repression. They examine the role of international and domestic legal systems and institutions in facilitating transition, and they also examine gendered experiences of transition. They also inform policymakers involved in peacemaking in local and international institutions, and they critically examine gendered experiences of transition. The TJI scholars advance in cutting-edge research and practicing in transitional societies such as Chile, Colombia, South Africa, Zimbabwe, and Israel and Palestine. TJI's impact in projects. They are a member of the Association of Human Rights Institutes, which carries out research and education in the field of human rights, and they facilitate exchange of ideas and collaboration among human rights researchers from across the disciplines. And there's a few case studies, which is some of their publications. The Amnesty Accountability and Victims' Rights and Peace Process is a peace process research including developing sustained relationships with public officials to inform policymakers and making recommendations for legal changes. They also involve in capacity buildings for NGOs and addressing conflict-related abuses. These are other two publications that also inform policymakers in international level and also with Northern Ireland. Professor McWilliams spoke at the, Professor McWilliams is a professor at TJI. She spoke at Women for Peace conference in Bogota, Colombia, and was invited to sign the peace accords. The DARE proposals for Colombian peace were lessons learned in Northern Ireland Good Friday peace agreements. So this is their impact. It even reached to Colombia and using their experiences in Northern Ireland and the peace process of the Good Friday Agreement in Northern Ireland to provide guidelines or advice to other societies that are going through transition.
And Monica McWilliams is also, she's been in Syria as well, helping with the same.
So the summer school on transitional justice that me and Suzanne attended, it was established in 2007. The Transitional Justice Institute itself was established in 2003. We attended the 9th summer school. He said it was in the Jordanstown campus of Ulster University. It's a 5-day residential course consisting of interactive lectures, workshops, and roundtable discussions. The aim is to bring together academics, practitioners, postgraduate studies for a dynamic learning environment. You get a certificate at the end of the course, and if you're interested, the course fee is £500. Definitely worth it. Something, it's definitely a resume builder, and you experience a lot from it, and you meet practitioners and academics who've been practicing this field for a long time. You learn about it, and you also have a very good chance to network too. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the TJI speakers, a little bit about them. So Professor Fiona Nealon, she is the Associate Director of TJI. She was representative at the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia domestic war crimes. She was also a special expert of the United Nations in promoting gender equality in conflict and peacemaking. Professor Monica McWilliams was the Chief Commissioner of the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission. She was also the co-founder of Northern Ireland Women's Coalition political party. She was also elected to the seat at the multi-party peace negotiations, which led to the Belfast Good Friday peace agreements. So she was part of the Good Friday agreements.
We'll explain a little bit about what that is in a minute.
Yeah. She was also a member of the Northern Ireland Legislative Assembly. Dr. Aisling Swain, she is a visiting scholar at the TJI. She previously managed humanitarian and development programs in conflict-affected states in Africa and Southeast Asia for international NGOs and the United Nations. She's also a senior gender advisor on the United Nations Interagency Standing Committee on Humanitarian Action Gender Capacity Roster. So that's just kind of to illustrate who these professors are and who these speakers are and what background they come from. Now we also have the external speakers that came and talked. Also, Ambassador Melanie Verveer. She served as the first U.S. ambassador for global women's issues, and she was nominated by President Barack Obama. As an ambassador, she traveled to 60 countries, coordinating foreign policy issues and activities for political, economic, and social advancement for women. She was appointed as the U.S. representative to the UN Commission on the Status of Women. She co-founded Vital Voices Global Partnership, which is an international NGO to invest in emerging women leaders. And during the Clinton administration, she was the chief of staff for Hillary Clinton, and she served as assistant to the president. She was also part of the adoption of the Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000, and she is a member of the World Bank Advisory Council on Gender and Development. And I'm going to talk about Professor Miriam Coronel Ferrar. She was the chairperson of the peace panel of the government of the Philippines in negotiations with the Maro Islamic Liberation Front. She was the first woman chief negotiator in the world to sign a final peace accord with a rebel group. She co-chaired the non-state actors working group of the international campaign to ban landmines. And she's also leading convener of the Citizens Network that promoted observance to the Comprehensive Agreement on Respect for International Humanitarian Law, which is forged between the Philippine government and the National Democratic Front. Now participants, there were 28 participants in the summer school, not including the speakers. I'm just going to name a few, just to illustrate kind of where who these practitioners or academics are and where they come from. Andrea Carolina Guardo, she's from Colombia. She is a program management specialist for the U.S. Agency for International Development. Frances Guy, she is the head of the Middle East region at Christian Aid, based in London. She was also representative for the United Nations Women in Iraq. And she was also a British ambassador to Lebanon, Yemen, and other posts in Sudan, Ethiopia, and Thailand. and she's a trustee in a number of charities focusing on human rights and education in the Middle East. Nadine Kadan, she's from Syria. She writes children books to encourage a reading culture in the Arab world. If you're interested, she has a Facebook page of her books. I can give it to you at the end. Pratibha Kanal, she's from Nepal. She's a human rights lawyer and a project coordinator in Nepal working for the implementation of Resolution 1325 and 1820. She brings issues of marginalized, conflict-affected women, who are victims of torture, killing, enforced disappearances. She takes them from the grassroots level to the policy level through legal aid, representation, and counseling. She also went to a Game of Thrones tour with me, so it was really fun.
You also what?
Went to a Game of Thrones tour with me at the end of the course.
Sure. So the conflict that we had mentioned in Northern Ireland, just to give you a bit more of a background on why we were in Northern Ireland for a Transitional Justice Institute. There was a conflict called the Troubles from approximately 1968 to 1998 in Northern Ireland. It did end with the signing of the Belfast or Good Friday Agreement. Depending upon which side you are, you will call it differently. There were over 3,600 people killed, many more injured, and there were a great many forced disappearances. And many of these people never saw their family members again. They never saw them alive again. So there were three main actors in this. There was basically, it was a movement by Republicans who included the IRA, the Irish Republican Army, and the Irish National Liberation Army. They wanted to have one united island of Ireland and break away from the United Kingdom. The British States Forces, of course, supported Great Britain to keep the Ulster, which is the north of Ireland, as a part of the UK. And then the Loyalists, the Ulster Volunteer Force, or the Ulster Defence Association, they were fighting on behalf of the British government. They wanted to rather remain a part of the United Kingdom. So nationalists are the same thing as Republicans. They were seeking greater civil rights. This group was also largely Catholic, and the ones who wanted to separate Great Britain. The ones who wanted to remain were largely Protestant. But it's important to keep in mind that this is not a religious war. It's about which nation they wanted to identify with. Paramilitary forces were very important. And here we have some images. Did you want to talk about them? Yeah. Okay. So
this was in Belfast when there was a murals tour. Part of it was a section of a murals tour. I'll talk about that later. This is basically, there's actually a wall that divides West and East Belfast, and between the Protestants and the Catholics, the Republicans and Loyalists. So, and there's like a memorial on the walls that has the name of the people who died in the conflict. This right here, like you can see the wall is like it's a really large wall, and this was like the gates for it, and they shut it down. They shut, the gates to cross between the two walls. They shut it down at a certain time, I think late at night. And there's the Irish flag right here, and just some murals, and there's a cross right there.
Yeah, and then as we were walking through, we actually got to go through some of the gates that they also shut still at night as we were on the mural tour. So you would see, we'll show you some of the murals later, but they have a whole variety of different types. And this is on the pictures that you're seeing of the fence here. This is on the Republican side of the fence, so that's why you've got the Irish flag, and these are the people who were killed. There was a memorial nearby of a 15-year-old up on the wall who was killed also.
Yeah, and during the conflicts, they used to like throw bombs at each other over the wall. Like one side would throw bombs and would hurt businesses, and the other side would throw bombs and would hurt houses. So it was just like this conflict. That's why I guess they built a bigger wall and they did the gates. They shut down the gates at night.
So we wanted to define a couple of the basic terms that we would be using through the presentation. The Women, Peace, and Security movement states that sustainable peace can only be achieved if women's human rights are promoted and respected, and if women have meaningful participation across all conflict prevention and resolution efforts, as well as in post-conflict rebuilding activities. This goes along with the main theme of the course of involving women further in the process of peace negotiations at all levels. Transitional justice, Tasneem talked about that earlier. Set of judicial and non-judicial measures that are implemented in order to redress the legacies of massive human rights abuses. These measures might include criminal prosecutions, truth commissions, reparations programs, and various kinds of institutional reform. So there are a lot of decisions to be made at this time, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of them as we go through the presentation. So there's, for women, peace, and security, you've got 4 basic pillars of prevention, protection, participation, and recovery relief.
Doctor, I think it was Dr. Swain, right? She was talking about the 4 pillars. She said that it's essential to have these 4 pillars when trying to transition from society, transition from conflict, because, and to also, she said, to prevent atrocities inflicted on gender atrocities, protect the women, also involve the participation in the negotiations and also the peace process. And relief and recovery, help the people, help the victims recover and provide relief for victims in the conflict.
And just to prevent such a thing from happening again, try to address the root causes of the issues.
So this course was 5 days long, and there was 2 to 3 speakers every day, and also a session that we did. So the first day, Professor Fianola Ni Aloin, she defined what political settlements were. She said that political settlements end violence in conflict-affected societies by engaging and co-opting elite actors with varied alignments of interest-based inducements and incentives. So, talking about interest and how there's interest in elites with interest who don't really have an interest in negotiating with other interest groups. Improve economic capacity and human well-being is also part of political settlements. And however, it can mean to some people that the men with guns continue to run the show and that the trains run on time, and not necessarily including everybody from the grassroots level to the higher level. She defined disputes, which is sectarian, resource-defined, territorial, ethnic, and ideological and cultural disputes. And during conflict, women experience sexual violence and unwanted pregnancies, STDs, and community stigma. There's also selective inclusion of elite women. So these elites have accumulated military power, and they have built-in historical advantages of racial wealth and property benefits in the existing status quo. And what she means by selective inclusion of elite women is that they can just be from relationships with powerful men, that they're part of the peace negotiations and not really have an interest for women themselves and for women who have been affected by gender violence. And she described it as losing a battle before it has begun, which means that even though they're women participants in the negotiations, they do not acknowledge or challenge the barriers that exist to prevent them from involving more people, more women participants, and being more involved in what the agenda of the peace negotiations should be. Post-conflict environment is about male power. She said it's about men losing their power, who are then replaced by men taking their power. It doesn't really involve all of the aspects or all of the interests or people involved from the conflict. And sometimes men are victimized as potential combatants. We did touch upon how men between the ages of 16 to 40 could be used as potential combatants and are therefore either recruited or killed in a conflict. Professor Catherine O'Rourke, she said political settlements are constituted by horizontal and vertical relationships, and the UN's approach is that women are excluded because their interests are viewed as broader than those of the men involved in the negotiations. So, like, women want more than what the men are really looking for in the negotiations, in the transition. Laws might be perfect on paper, but only 10% implemented. So they could have laws after negotiations or something on paper that's, involves other interest groups and involve women, but they're only 10% actually implemented. There is no trust for the civil society. They don't know what it is. So what that means is, like Nadine Kadan, the girl from Syria, she brought up this point saying that even the women in third world countries don't know what civil liberty is, that they should have, women rights, or that they should be included in peace negotiations and they should be including in, political participation, because they've never experienced that and they've just never seen it as a barrier that they have to challenge. They kind of just accept their role, and they don't also so this kind of shows no trust for civil society. NGOs are underfunded and underprovided. Therefore, they can't advance on their promises. So if NGOs are part of the negotiations or part of the transition, they really can't advance on their promise, which sets it up for their failure and creates no opportunity for them. This is a problem with the state's capacity and capability, and also a problem with the civil society. The third speaker in day one was Professor Swain. She had a feminist idea and definition for peace, which included equality, justice, choice, body integrity, autonomy, and women's achievement of control over their own lives. And she said that usually when, a human, usually when they think of, in negotiations of people, they usually think of men, and they kind of don't really see the women's side of it, like how women are being treated or being, affected in that conflict. In order to achieve feminist peace, we first need feminist awareness. So who gets in the negotiations? We need to really involve more feminists or more women for the interests of women, and not just because they're there as elites. And to to establish awareness that they should be involved, and this achieves feminist peace. And she talks about a multi-track diplomacy. There's 3 tracks. The first track is official high level, which includes the military and political level. Second track is NGOs and community. And the third track is grassroots, people-to-people interaction and understanding. And track 3 could, normally negotiates or has diplomacy with track 2, and track 2 has diplomacy with track 1, and through that, that's how negotiations are discussed. Peace agreements are negotiating existence. It's not necessarily, negotiating for power sharing, to share power, but most of the times they negotiate their own existence. Business includes business, food, resources, education, just negotiating their acknowledgement of these resources. And between 1992 to 2011, there was 31 major peace processes that involved women. 4% of the signatories were women, 9% of the negotiators were women. And the resolutions, some of the resolutions that were established from the United Nations for women participation was Resolution 1889. It urged member states to take further measures to improve women's participation. Resolution 2122 addresses the lack of quality of information and analysis on the impact of armed conflict of women and girls. Kind of like advocating for more information about how women are being treated or how women are being affected in conflict societies. Resolution 1820 facilitates equal and full participation of women at decision-making level. So just kind of like this progress to include women in peace negotiations and also acknowledge gender victims of gender violence. However, resolutions only matter in context of the structure of the government and the structure of the civil society. There's only so much that a resolution could do and how it could be implemented. So day 2, there was 2 speakers. The first speaker was Monica Williams. There was 3 kinds of challenge. She explained about 3 kinds of challenges in constructing a negotiation. She said, first is creating a constructive process for people to get to the negotiation, to the negotiating table. Ensuring proposal means something to everyone at the table, and ensuring what is agreed on gets implemented. Kind of what the previous slides have explained. Just who make sure all the groups involved in the conflict are at the negotiating table, make sure they have a voice at the table, and also agree on how it's going to get implemented. And she talked about a track 6, which is track 1, 2, and 3, all coming together at the table and discussing new governance, demobilization, demilitarism, institutional reforms, and the release of political prisoners. So if their negotiation could create a forum that can have all 3, like official level, unofficial level of academics and NGOs, and also the grassroots level, businesses and people, it would, I guess, improve negotiations and improve understanding of the conflict. There was a Maria Cahill case that she talked about also. It was a long-standing sexual violence case against a senior paramilitary member. That guy was appointed as senator in the Northern Ireland Parliament later, and it collapsed because she didn't have much faith in the justice system, because she was in the same room with her rapist to see, they were seeing who was telling the truth, and she was just in the same room. She wasn't believed. Nobody believed her, and it's kind of like this case kind of illustrates, how women in conflict societies, are just totally dismissed. And then the second speaker was Dr. Ava Kilmurray. She talked about the conflict stages model. I kind of drew it here just to illustrate what she meant.
I don't know if you'll be able to check this up.
Okay, so conflict stages. First, there's a latent conflict. Into the latent conflict, then in the conflict, there's emergence of it. There's more awareness of the conflict. More people are getting involved. Then there's an escalation where, most of the violence takes place. Then there's a deadlock and stalemate where there really isn't anything being isn't really happening there. None of the groups in either side are coming forth or negotiating or I guess meeting up or doing anything about the conflict at all. They're just they're just with their own interests. But then there's a de-escalation after the conflict a little bit, And after the de-escalation, this is where the negotiations take place, and people come to negotiate resolution. And after there's resolutions and negotiations, then there's a collaborative action. There's people, I guess, advising what should happen or what should be implemented to de-escalate or to de-escalate the violence and transition from conflict society to a normal society or to a peaceful society. She said working together, insider and outsider. Insider, she means like elites and military officials. And the outsider is the grassroots, the NGOs, and academics. For effectiveness, it's necessarily that, all of them come together for effectiveness, and not just for political reasons, but also to make sure that the society is fully transitioned from a conflict society. For an example, Israeli women and Palestinian women, just because they're women, and doesn't mean that they'll feel comfortable with each other or work together or be in the same room together. So it's not just them working together just because they're women, or there's and they have to work together for mutual interests and not just political reasons. This one's Israeli, this one's Palestinian. And you just gotta find a common ground for them to work together. Speak to all stakeholders, being prepared to act as confidential conduits. So a negotiator is supposed to speak to all stakeholders, act as a confidential conduit, and understanding political context. And there's the 4 levels of civil society and peace building. The 4 levels include community level, economic level, political level, and social level. Community level is the community relations and infrastructure, cross-community networking. Economic level is peace as prosperity, cross-border business relations. Political level means the lobbying and advocacy. And social level includes like the youth, the children, women, and everybody from all aspects of society. Okay, so day 3. There was only one speaker on day 3. Professor Miriam Hornell-Farrar. She talked about the 1987 Constitution, which mandated the creation of autonomous region in Muslim Mindanao region with their own regional government. This is in the Philippines, by the way. She talked about the Sharia law, the civilian law, and the customary law, but the Sharia law only applied to Muslims. So she talked about the dynamics of like different types of laws. She also talked about human rights groups that are focused on fighting the state instead of focusing more on human rights issues in the region, and she says how that's a challenge or a problem. We have to move away from the traditional security to a broader view of peace and security. What she means by that is that normally traditional security is viewed as just involving military officials or priests or generals, but a broader view of peace and security would involve all aspects of society and people from track 1, track 2, and from track 3. So peace negotiations start with a list of things. She said during peace negotiations, you have to start with a list of things that you all agree upon in the negotiating table. And then after you agree upon like some of the negotiations, you can then mention political participation of women or ending violence of women. Just as she said that you don't want to just come in and be known as the feminist person, the feminist woman trying to advocate for women's rights all the time. You just want to be flexible as someone who can negotiate with different different parts of the peace process, and then also mentioning, political participation of women and ending violence of women. And it just has to be a gradual step, not just like a head-on collision. We need more participation in the government for women, and we need, this part of the region in the Philippines has, affects women in a certain way. This needs to be stopped. She said it has to be gradual. You first have to create informality, which loosens up negotiations. So create like informal relationships with other negotiators or other people part of the negotiations. And this opens up new perspectives, and it makes for better discussions. And it kind of like loosens up the atmosphere. And she talks about the parity of esteem, which is a concept the concept of like women's rights should not just be ideal, but also legal, and that there should be gradual steps to kind of spread awareness and negotiate them and implement them, essentially. And then murals tour. This was a session with Professor Bill Ralston. Every 12th of July in Ireland, in Northern Ireland, there's an anniversary of the Battle of the Boyne in 1690. This celebrates the victory of Protestant Prince William of Orange over the Catholic King James of England and Scotland. It's a show of unionist solidarity. So this happened in 1690, which shows that, even though it was historical and even though it happened a long time ago, people are still using that as part of their identity, part of like what, that shapes their reality and that shapes their loyalty and identity, really. And so every July 12th, they do celebrate this, like kind of like the Protestants, won over the Catholics, or that's why it kind of like justifies why England came and took, established a government in Ireland. In 1908, murals started appearing. They were painted on the 12th of July. And they appeared on walls in the unionist working class areas. So they only appeared in the unionist areas in Northern Ireland. And it was the reason why the nationalists or like the Republicans couldn't paint their own murals was because there was a Flags and Emblems Act that privileged unionist symbolism and suppressed nationalist symbolic displays. So really just, you're only allowed to do murals if you're a unionist. And in 1981, however, when there was a hunger strike, there was 10 protesting prisoners died, and these were considered martyrs or heroes, martyrs or heroes for the Republicans and for the nationalists. So this kind of outraged them, and they started painting their murals as well. They painted murals of their martyrs, or the 10 people who died, and labeled them as heroes and a symbol of who they are and what they want, I guess. The young Republicans painted in the nationalist working class areas, so they only painted on their area, and the unionists painted in their area. Like they weren't painting in each other's area. But they painted, the Republicans and the nationalists, they painted history, mythology, current events, and international struggles, which I'll show you pictures of, while the unionists painted militaristic, belligerent militaristic murals, and it depended which military group was in the mural. Like if an area was dominated by a certain paramilitary, they would like paint their group or like their symbols, but it was still like a militaristic mural. And this was, I guess, fueled by the 1985 Anglo-Irish Agreement, which gave Dublin, which is in the Republic of Ireland itself, gave Dublin the same affairs of Northern Ireland, which is part of the UK. So this is the Unionist. This is the this is the Unionist areas. So you can see like belligerent, military, paramilitary groups painted on the walls. It's like huge murals too, like the whole side of the building. Stuff like says East Belfast battle, like lest we forget. The other one says we seek nothing but the elementary right implanted in every man, the right if you are attacked to defend yourself. So like pictures of guns and paramilitary groups. Paramilitary groups were created like to serve for the people. They weren't really legitimized. They were still the British Army and the British police force, but like each side had a paramilitary unit to like defend themselves or to act on their interests. This is also the Unionist area. You want to talk about the right hand? They have like symbols on the right hand.
Sure, that's a symbol of pride for the Ulster, because the story goes, so you'll learn if you take Dr. Fiske-Rusciano's Student Global Village with Northern Ireland, but there was the story of how the first king came and claimed to Ireland was the first. Everybody okay? All right. We're all coming into this, so I don't know what's going on. But that's okay. So there were two men were racing and whoever touched land on Ireland first was to be the next king. And so the future king of Ireland saw that he was losing. He cut off his hand and he threw it, and it touched the land. So he was the first to reach the land, and that's what the red bloody hand is. We will, it's a very nationalistic. We will die for our way.
And also that symbolism of like Protestants won over the Catholics, kind of like, this stuff like that happened, it's supposed to be like historical or something, but it's still part of it. Like this was painted in the 1980s. It's like very real in their life, in their reality. Even still talk about stuff like that as if it happened, like a decade ago. Other murals for Unionists. This kind of shows, like the one in the right shows the British flag, the United Kingdom flag. How is freedom measured? By the effort which it costs to retain freedom. So kind of like pro United Kingdom. This is like Northern Ireland is part of the United Kingdom, and we fought for this land. And in the left here, the Ulster conflict is about nationality. This we shall maintain. So it has the flag of Ulster, flag of England, Scotland, and Wales to kind of like show, United Kingdom and not just like Ireland. The nationalists who want to, cede to the Republic of Ireland, kind of like showing them that this has always been part of the UK. And now this is the nationalists or Republicans side. Their murals are more of like I said, like history, mythology, international struggles. This was the refugees, talking about the refugee crisis. Like they even had like an Arabic translation, which means like welcome refugees, or you're welcome here. On the right, that's Nelson Mandela. Yeah, that's Nelson Mandela. It says like a quote, "In my country, we go to prison first and then become president." So it shows him like smiling. There's like colors, and there's definitely more colors in the nationalist murals than the unionist murals. There's more like red and black and gray. There's also more pictures. They even talked about the Orlando shooting that happened. Like they even recognized that, even though it like happened like here and wasn't like in an international like conflict, they still recognized it and still like said we support, where we recognize the Orlando shootings. And on the right, talks about climate change and how climate change, affects everyone, but not equally. They show like how the developing world is being affected the most with climate change. So they bring up these like pressing, international issues, and instead of just, this is part of the UK, or we belong to Ireland. It's just more of like international stuff. And there's another mural. Okay, so this is a huge mural actually. It's like right on, wasn't it like near the gates for the wall that I showed you pictures of? This has like Frederick Douglass, Martin Luther King, I Have a Dream, like many like,
Yeah, it is.
yeah, many people who like fought for freedom and for,
Yeah, a lot of the civil rights.
yeah,
leaders
it's
from
like,
around the
yeah,
world,
it's,
they took inspiration.
it's like people from the United States and they're inspired from these people.
Obama's up there too.
Oh, yep.
All the way over the left.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's a mom?
Yep.
You can probably see it better on the big board, but yes,
Okay.
pretty neat. All right, so later on the third day, we actually stayed after our murals tour for a program it's called Bridge of Hope. Bridge of Hope is a community-based organization that provides services to victims and survivors of global conflict across Northern Ireland. So they provide victim services, for instance, counseling if they've got PTSD or anything from the conflict. They actually are able to use this transitional justice toolkit, which we'll show you at the end. This helps with group sessions, making everyone recognize that they're not alone, and kind of helping one another to work through their remaining issues. One of the things that I personally like best about this program is they also enable people who have been victims or survivors to become counselors and help other survivors along with themselves. So it's just the idea of using shared experiences to better everyone. And so we also visited the jail while we were there. The Crumlin Roll Dowell is very old. It's from 1845 to 1996 it was open. It was used during the Troubles. As you can see, there were executions there, so of course it's haunted. There were child prisoners. The political prisoners, while they were there, did not wish to be kept in the same wing. So they actually showed us a couple different wings. You can see in this picture here, this is one of them. They would have the Republican prisoners and the Loyalists at one point were separated because they just didn't want to be near each other. They would refuse to go and eat sometimes if the other party was eating. There was also, Tasneem mentioned the hunger strikes. 10 prisoners died in the hunger strikes. And there's another thing that was kind of neat, is the tunnel all the way on the right over there was actually built because they actually needed to repave it so that they couldn't, the prisoners used to take bricks on their way to the court to try to throw at the judge. So they freshly had to pave that so that they couldn't do that anymore. That was an interesting story that they told. So they also have wax figures that stare at you. So, a very deep place. And we actually got to take a visit to Stormont, where Parliament was building. And as you can see up on the function pass, I don't know if you can read it, but it says the sponsor is the Minister for Justice. She attended Melanne Revere's and the Women Leading Peace conference that Tasneem talked about on Monday. We got to briefly meet her, and she arranged for us to have this tour, which was very kind. So you can see the assembly room here. This is out front. The building, you can see it's a little bit more up close on the right down there. The paint is beautiful and very special as well. That the coating on it basically will make the paint last forever. And there's the fellow who did that had this special formula, and apparently he died right afterwards, and they can never make it again. So that's very original to the building. And then just some of the chairs that you can see. This is where the Parliament members actually sit. We got to go among and sit at their tables. Very good. All right. So when we returned from our field trip, we got to talk again with Dr. Nyerlang and Fidula, rather. A lot of them will go by their first names, so I'll refer to her as Fidula. So she talked about the law of occupation and how it was written basically by states for states. And the original intention was to maintain the status quo and keep the general structure of government in that area, even while you are trying to come in as another state to help them get things under control or whatever needs to be done. However, she describes that that's been changing in recent years, and we have more of a transformative occupation. So this idea of maintaining sovereignty is not quite as important. and neither is the idea of temporality, whereas states would necessarily be helped to maintain their sovereignty before under occupation. Now that's been called into question. So some of the wording under these laws is not very helpful for women. For example, if they say you cannot interfere with family honor, this basically means that violence against women, domestic violence, is untouchable, meaning the occupation forces cannot go in, they cannot help someone because that would be intruding upon family honor or family affairs. So this is a major problem. Another thing is they also are only able to act if it is considered a grave breach against society. Unfortunately, things like rape are not included in that definition because that's more of a personal attack, and oftentimes that is not addressed to the degree it should be. So what Fionnuala was talking about is basically the fact that women were not visible when these laws were written. They were not visible, and so we cannot expect the treatment of women to be equal to that of men. So it's an interesting idea that we need to change some international laws. Right now we have many soft laws, but this basically means that you can't enforce them very well. It's a little bit more of guidelines. As Tasneem mentioned, there's a low percentage of time when these things are actually implemented. So the idea is to try to up that. So another thing that Fionnuala mentions is that the link to the peace process and the idea of occupation has not really been addressed very much in research. She thinks there needs to be more attention given to occupation and the changes in the actual phenomenon of occupation in order to get a better idea for how we might address these problems. One thing that she encourages us to do, everyone to do, is to research under these particular circumstances only when you have a relationship or you're able to develop a relationship with the participants who might be giving you information that could indeed put them in jeopardy. So you should try to understand the consequences to participants who are giving you an interview or filling out a survey, whatever it may be. They want you to keep in mind their personal situation as well, not just political situation. So Aisling, again, discussed with us violence against women and political settlements. She identifies the difference between violence and harms. Whereas violence would be more physical harm that would come to a person, harms is a bit more extended. For example, silence really harms people, meaning they feel silence, they feel like the things that are being done to them or the fear of the things that are being done to them cannot be discussed for fear of them becoming hurt themselves. Aisling, I really like this quote of hers, violence is a form of the communication of power. I would, personally say that that's a faulty communication, but it is indeed. So harms often result from that. And what she would like us to address is how gender perceptions, both cultural and personal, are amplified by conflict. Women are, in a number of cultures, looked at as more of possessions, or there's a sense of pride and honor for the family. And that sometimes will make them a target. People will aim to hurt the woman to show that that family or that community, that state cannot protect its people. They cannot protect its honor. So the question is then, how do we stop this continuum of violence? We've got some laws with the United Nations, but again, we need to work on how to implement those, educate people about them, and involve women more in the process. All right. So there is a study currently being done and by Monica McWilliams and another participant, Dr. Jessica Doyle. Jessica and Monica are actually going back and redoing a study that was done by Monica McWilliams and Kieran. They did a study called Bringing It Out in the Open, where they went and interviewed many women in Northern Ireland about the types of harms that they faced, how effective the responses were, and whether or not they did indeed reach out to organizations, the police, hospitals, after they had been harmed or they were victims of violence. So they found these women that they were going to interview for this fresh study through Women's Aid, women who've been there for 6 months or so, who have had a bit of a chance to recover, but the experiences are still fairly fresh for them. But unfortunately, they did find similar statistics on harms, meaning that violence against women is equally prevalent as it was during the conflict. There is no difference. They are finding, this is not a completed study, but they're finding that there's no real difference between during conflict and post-conflict. However, there is a slightly positive thing here. 15% more women in the new sample had contacted agencies, and they also said they were helpful. We still need to make sure that these women are given a voice, they're listened to. As Tasneem mentioned, some women, especially during the conflict, and even now, unfortunately, were questioned. Are you sure? Was it him? Was this really what happened? One woman said if there's no blood, they're not interested. Meaning, if it's considered a soft crime and they weren't physically hurt, the authorities were not so interested. So there has been improvement in the response. That's what they're finding so far. So they're trying to gain a more in-depth understanding of the realities that women are facing and hopefully how we can go about fixing that through this study. So on our final day, we got to meet Dr. Christine Bell, who discussed with us women and peace agreements in a more general sense. She talked about success in negotiations as needing to have agreement, but also the ability to enforce that agreement, because that needs to be representative of the interests of all the people involved, not just certain parties. Otherwise, this will fall apart. She also describes the difference between a ceasefire and a peace agreement. A ceasefire would be, we're simply going to stop shooting each other for a while, but there's no guarantee of peace. But with a peace agreement, the idea is to address the causes of that violence and prevent it from happening again in the future, to come to a settlement that's more permanent. She actually raised the issue of transitional justice, being a bit dangerous to include in peace agreements, because she describes the use of amnesty, which is often a tool that people use in order to actually have people come out with information and discover the truth of what happened during the conflict. Sometimes amnesty or partial amnesty can be necessary, but making those commitments and preventing local areas from being able to make decisions about implementation can sometimes be rushing the process, and that can make the process fragile. Christine wanted to incorporate a better gender perspective. As Tasneem mentioned earlier, men face different harms than women sometimes during these conflicts, and the idea is to get a better understanding for how each section of the population is affected to address these things for everyone. Incorporating women at the negotiating table. There's usually, sometimes you'll hear an argument that women are better negotiators or they're more willing to compromise. But Christine warns us against using these, because then we have the expectation that she'll do it better or she will be judged, because there are, unfortunately, very few women compared to men in these negotiations. So when something goes wrong, whether or not it is her fault, they will say, is it because she's a woman? This is the possibility. Until recently, it has been mainly men in these positions because they have the connections. They know the other men involved. Like Tasneem said, it's a relationship of power. So we had the privilege of meeting with Carol of Christian Aid and Paul of the Pat Finney King Center. These are two civil society organizations that work with the population in Northern Ireland. Christian Aid partners in 40 countries and works with people of all faiths trying to fight poverty and just provide humanitarian aid in any way possible. So that might include helping them get housing or psychological care, whatever they may need. Carol describes gender justice as a work in progress. We need to move beyond just having women present at negotiations, but we need to, as Tasneem also touched on earlier, make sure that they are the most qualified women to fight for what is needed. They need to be sure to have training. They need to make sure that they are capable of getting these things done. This will help to shift the power dynamic. So the Pat Finney King Center, or the PFC, aims to help find answers for families of the disappeared persons during the conflict. So they will work in pairs. They'll send two people to work with a a family. And they will try to find out what the state knows and when the state knew that information. Because, as Tasneem also touched on earlier, a lot of the members of the various paramilitary organizations or the people who were involved in the conflict are now in government. So the question for these people is, in part, how can we trust these people? How can we understand what happened? Torture was used during the conflict, people were disappeared, and silence about these things, largely coming from people in power not wanting their reputation to be damaged, is very, very hurtful to the families, and they can never have peace. So the question is raised whether amnesty is a good or a bad thing. The PFC actually uses amnesty to have people come forward. They'll say, we will not charge you if you will bring forward information about a particular case. So once they get that information, they're able to help the families, because oftentimes the families want their wrongs recognized. They want to be recognized that they have been wronged, and they don't all necessarily want punishment. They just want peace and understanding. Last thing he really touched on that I found very important was that there should be no hierarchy of guilt or innocence. You cannot simply say that one crime was more hurtful to a population than another crime, and that helps you work with victims and hopefully to get the best information. So, final slide before some more pictures. Just thinking forward, to sum up some of these points, we want to research these things mindfully, meaning develop relationships and try to understand the consequences of sharing this information. Again, in the Northern Ireland conflict, religion was only involved because it was used to separate people. It was not the cause. The cause was a national identity. We have to gain a nuanced understanding of gender, and that doesn't necessarily mean only for women and girls. Again, we need to understand the differences among the experiences of all parts of the population. We have to take care to not allow the women, peace, and security movement to be limited by these challenges. We have to measure the success of agreement. Our professors argue by something called a positive peace. This is something that we talked about a little bit earlier, but a negative peace would simply mean we're not fighting, no one's shooting each other. But a positive peace has indicators of peace, meaning, for instance, we could walk outside and not be afraid that someone would shoot us. We could feel comfortable as women or as men going about our daily business in the ways that we usually would. In a peace agreement, women have the opportunity, and men as well, not just to go back to normality, but to improve by addressing the root causes of their lives into the future. So this will help make a lasting peace. If we don't rush the process, and if we encourage local grassroots involvement, civil society to become involved, then we will get a better idea for how to do this. So, we were there right after Brexit. So, I don't know if you all can read these, but this is a vote leave sign and a vote to stay sign. They were still up everywhere, right? Mm-hmm. And then this was a little sign that our one professor, Bill, was wearing during the murals tour. He says, I want to wear this so that none of the young people will be mad at me because I didn't vote leave, so you can't blame me. They were a bit stressed.
And they blame the older people.
Yeah.
The older generation. So on the last day, you get to go and, yeah, Rachel's smiling back there, it's awesome. So you get to go and visit this castle, it's beautiful. You get to eat inside, you can walk around and take insane numbers of pictures as we did. But it's a beautiful place, and it's a really nice way to finish an excellent week, really. And they give you these certificates at the end, like for completing the course.
Yeah.
After it's like a dinner, you know.
Yeah, it's really nice. We actually had Lady Hale from the British Supreme Court actually came and joined us briefly. So that was pretty exciting. We had a few surprise guests. There was a female governor from Afghanistan actually came and sat in on our class for half a day. We got to meet her briefly. She didn't get to talk in front of everyone, but she's a really nice lady. So you'll get to meet all these surprise people that aren't even on the list, but they're incredible people. So these are some pictures, are these mostly in Belfast? Yeah. This is the view when you walk out of out of the campus onto the road. That's the view. It's beautiful.
Yeah, it's much better than, like, the picture just doesn't do it justice.
Yeah, it's true, especially on the screen.
I mean, the weather's always like rainy and cold and foggy, but like,
Beautiful
it's
rainbows.
beautiful. Yeah, there's always rainbows,
Stunning rainbows.
like double rainbows.
One picture that I wanted to point out to you guys is this one. I don't know that you can read it from where you are, but this is honoring an International Day of Peace, this image here. And I thought it was poignant that that was framed by the gates that they still close at night in Belfast. So I found that, to be very interesting. These are some of our professors. That's Monica in the center, and then Avila on the end. These are all people who were involved in a research project, Women Leading Peace, that took 4 different nations and looked at their circumstances and how effective those peace agreements were. So it was really an honor to get to meet them as well. And that is what is hanging in the room that you will be in for conference, the picture with the one dress. I wish I got a better picture of that. So, travels. We can each talk, I guess, about some of the things. The cop car was great. That was a sneaky picture we took. And this is actually in Dublin. This is the St. Patrick Cathedral. This is near Dublin. There's a castle called Malahide that I went to. What's neat is those are French people there that I got to talk to also. So bring your languages if you are in the mood. Dublin's very, very international. Again, some more pictures. That I think is that City Hall? Yeah, that's City Hall in Belfast. Or no? Yeah.
Not the one in the left.
No, this one is.
No, the middle one.
Yeah, the one second from the right is City Hall in Belfast. And you've got Malahide Castle, a guy playing his music on the street in Dublin. It's very, very lively. And then this was Albert's Clock in Belfast.
Yeah, they call their cop cars street crime sweepers.
Crime sweepers, yeah.
Yeah.
And they've got little broom-looking things on the front.
Yeah. And like I went to there's this famous geographic location called Giant's Causeway. It's really cheap. You just pay for like the bus tour was I guess like £25, and I went with Prativa too. And they're just some of the images that you can see. Like this is I forgot what castle it's called. I forgot what it's called. But the other pictures are like Giant's Causeway, and it's like basically mountains and like cliffs, and you get to see like different scenes and stuff. So it was really fun. And that was like after the course. You can stay after you can stay at Ulster University for £25 a night after the course is finished. So you're only charged £25 a night, which is really worth it because you can like explore and stuff. And it's very cheap because they have a huge tourism industry in Ireland. Yeah.
So, does anyone have questions for us?
We've got a few minutes for
About
questions.
anything at all? Yeah, I'm sorry, we kind of took up all the time because of that.
What was the one most exciting counterintuitive thing that you have learned during this experience?
That's a tough question.
I think networking with like the other people, and not just people, but like people who've experienced, who've been working in this field for all their lives. Like with the one girl we saw, she was from Kenya. I think I briefly described like her background. She's like trying to hold her own president accountable. Like she's living in Kenya and she's trying to hold the Kenyan president accountable for the post-2007, 2008 election war crimes. And that's like, it's really like, it's just very interesting to see like someone, and she was living in Kenya too, like, and also like just meeting people, and like as for me personally, just meeting other women who are like also passionate and like really are working to, improve their communities and to be part of the peace negotiations. It's just very inspiring, really.
And I think probably one of the most interesting things to me was talking about, Marion mentioned this and Christine, but apologize. I found it really fascinating, the idea of how we can go about balancing cultural expectations with incorporating women's rights, and how we can try to learn about those things and then incorporate and educate the women. There was one of Miriam's articles that she had us read was actually about that. So personally, that was probably one of the subjects I found most interesting. Any other questions?
Well, thank everyone for coming, and thank you very much. Amazing If there's any pizza left, please take it. Huh?